Hello, everyone. My name's Irma, and I want to welcome you to our webinar titled Mastering Disaster Recovery with Proactive Planning Using the S.E.C.U.R.E framework. We're thrilled to have you join us today. A few calls before we get started. This session is being recorded. If you miss any part of it or want to revisit the information, a link to the recording will be sent out to all the registrants after the webinar. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We hope you find the webinar valuable and walk away with at least one or two actionable items around disaster recovery. If this is not your first time, thank you for tuning back in with us. This is our third webinar in the series focusing on the S.E.C.U.R.E framework, and we are excited to dive deeper into the recovery component today. Throughout the session, feel free to drop in your questions in the chat. We will do our best to address them during the webinar, and we will carve some time at the end to answer any questions you might have and that we might have missed. The webinar is hosted with our esteemed partner, Zerto, and an HPE company. Before we dive into today's topics, I want to introduce our esteemed speakers. We have Chris Borowski, our product manager here at OTAVA over the business resilience product family. He has over 7 years of experience working with cloud service providers. Chris is passionate about exploring the complexities of data protection and recovery, equipping business to remain prepared for the unforeseen circumstances. Chris is joining us from Michigan, and if you visit his LinkedIn page, his profile slogan is "Making Data Protection Sexy Again." We also have Crystal Dufavio, who has been in the IT industry for over 26 years, with an emphasis in disaster recovery for the last 9. Coming from both enterprise and managed service provider side of the house. She is a Colorado native who loves to travel and outdoors. Thank you both for joining us today. We're looking forward to your insights and expertise. So with that, let's dive into today's agenda. We'll have an overview of the S.E.C.U.R.E framework. Next, we'll discuss the distinctions between backups and disaster recovery. Then we'll focus why protection, recovery, and rigorous testings are vital to robust disaster recovery strategy. Then wrap it up with explaining the benefits of leveraging Zerto solution in conjunction with OTAVA to create a resilient and efficient disaster recovery plan. Lastly, we'll open up the floor for any remaining questions we might have. No one wants their business to be compromised because bringing things back to their initial state is expensive and hard. Here, the S.E.C.U.R.E framework was created by one of our senior product managers. Shout out to Chaz Motter if you're out there in our audience. But it's more than just an acrostic. It's designed to make cybersecurity strategy simpler and to meet you where you are depending on the component that makes sense. S stands for shrink the attack surface. E stands for examine, monitor, and analyze. C stands for contain the attack vectors. U is for undo, isolate, and restore. R is for recover business continuity. Evaluate is for evaluating your security posture. Today, I'll hand it over to Chris to dig deeper into the recover component.
Yeah, thanks, Irma. So yeah, when we're talking about recover specifically as part of the S.E.C.U.R.E framework, we're talking about disaster recovery as a service and business continuity. You're going to hear me and Crystal say that word a lot, continuity, right? Because that is the biggest part of maintaining a business in our modern ecosystem that we're existing in. So let's dive in. Okay, so first, let's talk about this, right? Because this is the number one thing that we always hear about when we talk about disaster recovery as well. Well, I have backups. Okay, that's great, but there's some pretty big differences when we're talking about backup versus disaster recovery services, right? When we're talking about backup, we are talking about point-in-time data recovery images versus disaster recovery being that system and workload recovery system trying to get your systems, your workloads back up and running as quickly as possible versus just I need to go get some data, right, Crystal?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Backup, you can go back to, say, you need an Excel file from 4 years ago. That's backup. That's a great purpose for backup. That's compliance. That's everything. I stay in my lane, which is disaster recovery, and that says I need everything that I need to work with up and running, and I need it up and running as fast as possible.
Yeah, and I love the descriptor of of an Excel sheet, right? Or you need, let's say it's even as something as important as SQL, right? Like, hey, I've got a database that I need to recover. Well, it's not the whole system, right? I don't need to recover my entire SQL instance. I need one little, chunk of the data, like piece of data somewhere. Okay, cool. That's what we use backups for, right? Not, oh crap, my entire office is a hole in the ground. Now what?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Irma, we can go to the next one there. So let's talk about hole in the ground, right? CrowdStrike. Let's,
Yes.
we've heard everything from, Delta is talking about, a pretty major lawsuit. There was hundreds of millions of people down, just unable to do
Yeah.
anything, right? Well, if we have DRaaS, all you got to do is go, hey, they pushed that update at 12:01. Let's go back to 11:59. Oh, look, all of our systems are up, and now we're not going to get that change push anymore, right? We went from, oh my God, I have to go log into each one of these devices and go change this one file or delete this one file to, we're good.
Yeah, and when you looked at the workaround to boot into safe mode and edit one file, and I mean, my friends that are still in the enterprise space are like, "Come on, what are we doing?" Like this is not sustainable. They were like, "Look at our hundreds, if not thousands of machines that we're doing this to. How do we push this out? But you have to get it up and running." And so when we talk about disaster recovery, we talk about this malicious, got in this, little secret invader file that's been sitting in there for 3 weeks. We don't even think about the fact that this could be a very real, very, mistaken upload that took everyone down. It doesn't matter that it was a mistake or an accident or how sorry they are, you're down. And if you could have, like you said, went back to 11:59, no harm, no foul. Okay, yeah, that's a lot better. That's completely different than backup. Even if you had had an accurate backup, when was it? Right? Was it 24 hours ago? So you're going to lose 24 hours over one DLL file? Like that's kind of it's a price. It's a price to pay for sure.
Right. Yeah. God forbid you didn't have backups that ran,
Yeah.
you know, in right before it. If, best case scenario is you're running right before it. Then you still have to write back all of that, whatever other change data is in between that, right? You're not just talking about, oh, well, let's just turn them up. They're over here now.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
and
And you
what
couldn't test, you couldn't test. So if
right.
you go to restore a backup, right? I mean, this is the ultimate cross your fingers and hope because you're hoping that that backup that you picked had what you needed in it and you can test against it.
Right.
Whereas with disaster recovery products, specifically Zerto, I said fail you into a testing space and look at it and be like, "Ooh, this one's still a little
Hmm.
dicey." Go back 5 more seconds and find that one. And
Right.
that's the type of thing, that's the protection that you really need. We used to live in a space where if you went down, you could lose 24 hours. You could lose a week. You just blame it. Blame it on the systems. We all have computers. Nowadays, you
Right.
can't lose time like that. We work in a 24-hour by 7, 365 type of ecosystem, and you need to be up and working all the time. You cannot lose data. You cannot lose performance or production, period.
Right, exactly. And that's really the big thing, right? Is we've, in the past 5, 10 years or so, we've really gotten accustomed to, and especially us in the States and, the more high tech areas, we've we expect 24 by 7 by 365, right? Our
Yeah.
customers expect 5 nines, right? Or whatever,
Yep.
whatever number they're using. So if you go down so like if we look at this chart, right? If you go down for two days, let's say best case scenario like with CrowdStrike,
Yeah.
right? It takes you 6 hours. Well, let's compare that against one, right? Now
Yeah.
you're talking about, that factor of not only are you losing money because your production down, but your customers are upset, your employees are sitting there on their hands, so you're paying employees to
Yeah.
to do nothing because you can't do anything, right? It's not always malicious, right? Sometimes
No.
things just happen.
Hmm.
It could be a
Yeah.
power surge. It could be what if your ISP goes down, right? And you are hard down networking. Then what?
Hmm. Yep.
So, we really want to focus on this whole idea of recovery time objective, right? That's DR's biggest purpose, right?
Yeah.
You can always go back and if there's data missing, so be it, right? That's not keeping you from doing business necessarily. That's hey, that's a pain in the neck that we have to go back and get that, but it's not I can't work. My company is gone, right? So that's
Yep.
really where, when we talk about RPO versus RTO, right?
Well,
Recovery time
yeah.
versus recovery point.
And I love looking at a slide like this because it really highlights exactly what I always say. So your RPO is what does it take to make a change in production and me to get it over to your DR site? How long does that take? 5 seconds, 10 seconds, with backups, 24 hours, whatever it is, right? And then RTO, recovery time objective, is how long it takes from when you say, "Ooh, we're down," till you can be back up, right? And that's spinning up those systems. And like you said, that's not rehydrating data from a backup. That's not choosing a new location. That is just saying, I need this machine running. I need this workload running. I need this group of machines. I need this whole environment up and running now. And that's what an RTO is, right? Is how long I can get you, how long takes to get you up and running. That way you're back in the game. And that's really the difference between these two numbers and where, DR just is far and different than backup because of
Right.
that.
Right. Yeah, it's, how much can you afford to lose if you're down, right?
Mhm.
And for most people it's not, if you're down 2 to 10 days, you're down. You're done. That's a nail in the coffin for most businesses, right? Even 24 hours, depending on what your business does. If you're a small, medium-sized business, 24 hours is a long time.
For sure. And the trust factor, right? I mean, so
Hmm.
it takes a long time to build those relationships and that trust. And how long does it take to lose it? And it's not very long. I mean, you
Yeah.
blink and all of a sudden a website's down for 24 hours. Yeah, that's the airline companies actually use this all the time as their example. They said, if we've got our app downloaded on your phone and you go to book a plane ticket and we're down all day, you fly Southwest. And that's what ends up happening every time. And so they were like, this is too big. This is too big. We have to make it so our app works. Like when you log into our app, we can have one mess up. We cannot have 24 hours worth of just cycling and won't log in because we'll lose business. And will you come back, right? Because
Right.
that's the thing is every single company out there wants to keep your business and wants to retain you as a customer. So if you book today with that, other airline, are they sending you coupons? Did you get points? Weird. You got 10% off your rental car. And now it just spirals and companies realize how much this means. They're like, no, we can't be down for 24 hours because you can't even, calculate how much you lost in that 24 hours, much less
Right.
the news is going to paint that everywhere that you're down. So yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Get back up and running.
Yeah, and especially if you're not like if you're a person that's, not at home and trying to get a
Mhm.
flight, right? You're like, "Hey, I'm halfway across the
Yeah.
country and I need to get home because, pick a reason, but I need to get
Yeah.
home today
Yeah.
and now I can't." Right?
Yeah.
Or you're,
Absolutely.
let's say it's like you're a manufacturing company, right? And or like an online sales company, right? And people are like, "Hey, I need this part tomorrow." Sorry, we're not available right now, so oopsies, and they're gonna forget that you were ever a thing because they're gonna go back to the one that was available, right? Regardless of the price difference or whatever. Being here, it's kind of like parenting, right? Being here is the most important thing. Whether you do it well or not, being available is the most important thing. The idea of like, again, let's talk about what are you going to lose in the
Hmm.
event of a DR, an event that would require a DR failover,
Yeah.
right? And it doesn't even have to be malicious. It doesn't have to. It can be an accident. It can be
Yeah.
there. It's we don't live in a world where, well, I have my physical data center and then I have a second physical data
Hmm.
center, or whatever. We with all of the cloud computing and everything else going on, it doesn't have to be a natural disaster to cause
No.
these things anymore.
No, and really when I got into the DR space, that's what it was, right? It used to be a player like Walmart, right? So Walmart has many data centers, right? So they've got their hot data center, and then they've got warm, cold. They've got all these different spots that they replicate to naturally in the back end because they can't go down, and they've realized this, right? But that was faced around like some type of geo event. So we had fire, flood, hurricane, stuff like that. They could plan for it, they could prepare for it. Nobody really tested because it was pretty ugly to test, but it was there. So nowadays, when you think about it, it's not Walmart that we're talking to, even though they still use DRaaS services. It is everybody else. It is the fact that we have become a society that does not accept any kind of outage. So if you don't, I mean, from anything, from the builders here local in my little town to the gas station POS systems, anything, nothing can go down anymore. And so when you start looking at that and the cost of that, we came up with, as a technology industry, we came up with the idea, what about if you did DR as a service, right?
Hmm.
Because you can't afford that second data center. I have insurance on my car. I can't just buy a second car to have it sitting around, but I can have the insurance on that data. And I can say, hey, I need to be back up and running because my business is important. I just can't pay for the second data center. And in comes DRaaS, right? And so it solved this issue because everything is now connected to some type of network. It's amazing to me when you unbox a new appliance and they're like, would you like to join Wi-Fi? I was like, probably not. I mean, probably not, but maybe, I don't know. But it happens. So when you look at how far reaching that is and how widespread that is, it's everything, right? And you
Yeah.
start deciding to yourself, especially as a company, small, medium business company, what can you lose? And like you said earlier, Chris, what can you lose? I mean, have you sat down and really thought about it? I've got a ton of developer friends. I'm willing to bet that they will say you cannot lose your development environment, due to all of the different, rules and regulations out there. They can't have any of that development code on their local systems anymore. It's all saved on servers, on VMs, up in their clouds. Can they lose it? I mean, sure. I mean, I'm sure they'll take little mini vacations, but it's going to hurt your company in the long run not to be able to get back up and running.
Yeah, and I loved there was two things you mentioned in there. One of them was, when it's a natural disaster, you know it's coming, right? You have some
Hmm.
kind of forewarning of,
Hmm.
hey, there's a hurricane, off the out in the
Yeah.
Gulf Coast somewhere, right? Like I know that I have days
Hmm.
to prepare for that, right?
Yes.
I have
Yes.
days.
Yep.
We can, start the transition with my physical
Hmm.
data centers where we start moving workloads over, right? With CrowdStrike,
Yep.
you had zero warning.
Yep.
That was it. It was just, oh,
Yep.
well, now we're down. Great. Now what?
Yep. Well, and nobody could even really tell at first what was going on. They're like, we've just
Right.
got this rash of like blue screen of deaths. Like, so
Yeah.
everybody's like, oh, it's Microsoft, and everybody's like, well, I don't know if it's Microsoft. Hold
Well,
on, like,
yeah.
you know, I mean, like
Yeah.
like the funny cartoons that are going around, like didn't take down my teams, but I was waiting for it. And that's really what it was everybody thought it was Microsoft.
Right.
Microsoft wasn't down,
Right.
like if
Yeah.
they were down like us. They weren't down like anyone, they didn't cause it. And
Hmm.
that really highlights, like you said, there was that didn't make the news the night before, like prepare for this because tomorrow's going to be bumpy, you
Hey
know?
guys, just so you know, we're gonna release a patch that's gonna break everything. So buckle up.
Exactly. Exactly. Hopefully you know how to get it, F9 into safe mode and try to
Right.
repair it yourself. Should be good. Should be good. Yep.
So yeah, and so let's talk and so you mentioned another thing that was, planning, right? In the olden days it was, well, we have a plan. We'll see if it works when we need it, right? So when we in our next slide, we kind of talk about why Zerto, right? So we've talked about why DR, right? DR as a baseline is important, but why do we love you guys so much, and why do we love working with your software so much? So there's a couple things on here. I've included a screenshot. This was a live screenshot. I even included the timestamp and date because I wanted everybody to understand this was an actual picture that I took of our environment. Those are our RPOs. We talk about recovery point, right?
Yep.
What's the biggest one there? 14 seconds. I can
Yep.
recover everyone that uses our DRaaS service a maximum of 14 seconds ago.
Yep.
Like I can't beat
Yeah.
that, right? Like
No, for sure
that's
not.
so like as a relatively young-ish technologist, right? I'm in my 30s,
Yep.
so comparatively it's relatively young.
Yeah.
To me, that is amazing, and I'm sure to especially the people that have been in the industry
Yep.
for longer, like you think again comparing against, we have a physical place that we have days to prepare to fail over, and we don't
Yes.
know how long it's going to take us, how well it's going to work. I can show you right now, this is
Yep.
how long ago I have your data.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's amazing. And it's funny because I used to talk to people and I am old, so I've been doing this a long time and people are like, "Yeah, but like what about like when you change a file, like a big file? Like you can't get that over." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, because we don't work at a file level." I was like, "I work at a
Right.
block level." I was like, "How many blocks did you change?" And they're like, "Well, how would we know that?" I was like, "You don't, but your system does." And it'll get it across. So you'll be good. You'll be good. And it's
Yeah.
amazing when you take it down to that block layer how fast we can get, right? And Zerto is bar none best in class at compressing it,
Hmm.
encrypting it, and sending it across. And the other side, it's just sitting dormant, right? So
Just
it's not
waiting.
like something, yeah, it's not something that's automatically running on the other side that's corrupting everything over there. So you can choose another point in time and get back up and running to where you need to be.
Yep. Yeah. No. And you can see there's some like in that screenshot. There's some greens and yellows or whatever. But like
Hmm.
most of those aren't actual. They're not recovery data issues. They're not data recovery issues. They're, hey, I need you to test every so often, right? Because we
Yep.
one of the things we can do is set flags in Zerto in that interface and say,
Yeah.
hey, you have to test this every 6 months, or you're out of SLA, and that's what those little little yellow triangles are, right? Is I love this product so much. It's between the RPO and RTO, we talk about things like that. We're forcing customers, forcing ourselves,
Hmm.
right, to
Yep.
stay on our testing,
Yep.
right, to make sure that, okay, we've got a DR service. Does it work? That's why we do this, right? You
Yep.
know, and even in 6 months, how many changes do most companies make over a 6 month period to their
Yes.
environment?
Yes. Or the people that run their environment, right? So
Right.
if you lost the knowledge of how to get this up and working, because someone moved on, even to a new position, what does that look like Tuesday night when things go down? So you have to be able to test it. You have to say, hey, actually, I mean, Mike moved on, and that's awesome for Mike, but we have to make sure that everything still works here. We have a DR run book, we have everything documented, we know what it takes. Let's test it. And you need that test to not be terrifying to do, to not take down production, to not lose data, to not corrupt things, to not spend 3 days in a data center, underneath the cold air conditioning to make sure that it comes up and running. And so I think Zerto answers a lot of those, for a lot of different customers across the world.
Yeah. And so to give you a couple examples, right? Like we've got customers from, you know, 5 or 6 machines in Zerto to, I think our biggest one's like 120, right?
Hmm.
And even that 120, so it takes us, a full work day, a full 8 hour day to do a test for them,
Yep.
but they can test 120 VMs in an 8 hour workday.
Yep.
Right? And we're talking
Exactly.
about terabytes of data that we are spinning up in
Yep.
database instances and web applications, and they're
Hmm.
going and doing their whole checklist, right?
Hmm.
And without and production never knows.
No, no, they're answering production tickets while doing it. They're handling
Right.
production. And Zerto spins up a secondary location that we're copying all of the production rights. So all the changes that they're making on that production side, we aren't losing anything. And you're still testing, which means that if you ran out of time, you just stop the test. You're like, I'll pick this back up tomorrow. Like, I ran out of time today because it's not this, end of the world test like it used to be.
Right. No, and I the one thing you mentioned there that I don't know if people knew before coming into this, while you're testing, we are still taking all of that
Hmm.
change data and backlogging it, right? And
Yep.
then once you're done testing, you'll see it all there ready to go. There's
Yep.
no impact to the test or production in that replication
Absolutely.
cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're, and it depends on the testing schedule. It depends on what you agree on. and what you have, for your environment. But if you're in the middle of a test and you're like, whew, we just went down, you stop the test and it merges all of those writes that have happened. And now you can come up from any time that you need, you know?
Right.
Maybe it happened during the test, or maybe it didn't, maybe it was before that test. But you
Yeah.
have all of those different options still to fail back to.
Yeah, no, it's phenomenal the insight that we get into, the data change rates and everything like that, where
Hmm.
we can, and we can go into something like, and I don't have a screen for this, but Zerto Analytics, right? Zerto
Hmm.
Analytics is one of my favorite tools that exists, right? So when let's say we're onboarding a new customer, right? We hook up, a little probe in their environment and say, hey, let's run this, for a couple days, see what your change rate looks like, go pop it into Zerto Analytics, and all of a sudden we can go, okay, here you go. Here's what your, impact will be if we try to do DR protection for you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is how much networking you'll need. This is how much space you'll need. Because that's
Hmm.
always the question, right? The same reason why I can't afford the second car. I don't want all the space either, right?
Yeah.
So if you can look at the compression rates and stuff like that and run that analytics planning tool against your environment and be like, hey, actually, and this is the best part, right? So you can get onto DR environment and start setting things up, and maybe you do the 20%, right? The heavy hitters. You're like, these machines, if we have these go down, we're done.
Yeah.
Done. But then once you see that and you're like, I can test these machines anytime I want and I spin it up, that's pretty neat. How much
Hmm.
does it cost to protect this many more? And you
Right.
can run that planning tool and see, because again, I go back to my development buddies. They'd like their stuff. They'd like their stuff protected. But, I mean, obviously you have a business to run,
Yeah.
and so we're just asking you to come to Otava and say, hey, what's this going to run me? Like, is this actually
Right.
worth it? And I'm willing to bet you that, 9 times out of 10, absolutely, it is worth it to have nearly every machine covered, just because it becomes a light switch approach. You can just flip it back, and
Yeah.
then everything's up, and rather than, again, 20% is up and running, and the other you're booting into safe mode. So,
Right.
I mean, those are the two choices, right?
Yeah, I love your second car and car insurance analogy, right? Let Otava be the rental
Hmm.
car company,
Yes.
right? That you're like, hey, my car broke down, I need a new one.
Hmm.
Here's my insurance money that I've been
Yeah.
paying for whatever period of time. Oh, here's a new car. Let's get you
Yeah.
up and running and going back to work,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Exactly.
It's and not only storage, but like, do you have the bandwidth to support everything
Yeah.
you want to protect, right? Because
Yeah.
I think that's one that a lot of businesses don't really consider, right? Well, I've got 20% change rate servers and they're 10 terabytes. Okay, well that's a lot of data we have to move,
Hmm.
right? Do you have do you have the network connectivity
Yeah.
to support that? Do you need to buy a second DR circuit to support your DR service? Like, these are
Hmm.
important things. And when we're talking about cost, is it more expensive than backups? Yes. Is it
Yeah.
worth it? Yes.
Yes.
Right. There's the comparison against, again, if we go back a couple of slides, we don't have to actually go back, but if we go back a couple of slides, right? What's the difference between being down for 24 hours or
Hmm.
days to hours, right? Like,
Yeah.
the that math is easy to do.
Yes.
It is so easy to do.
Yes.
Like,
Well,
okay, so
yeah.
here we've got our math back on the table,
Yeah.
right? So let's say you pay us.
Hmm.
Let's throw out a number. $8 million over the course of a year. Guess what?
Yeah.
You still saved money.
Yes. 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 And
Right? Like,
reputation, and reputation. Like, that's the
right.
crazy part.
Yeah.
Every time something in the news happens, somebody pings me and says, "Hey, Crystal, tell me in layman's terms what happened." And I'm like, "Well, you're not gonna like what I say, but and it is. It's usually, I mean, very, very rarely are they malicious attacks, honestly. The malicious attacks, the ones that I know of, never even made it to the news. And they try to hide it so well. Generally speaking, you don't get back all of your data. The data you do get back is corrupt, and you spent all that Bitcoin to get back corrupted data, you know? So these non-malicious attacks make it to the news. And then we've got all our apologies going everywhere. But again, you were still down, you know. You're right
Right.
in the bucket of apologizing to everybody, even though you did nothing wrong.
And with the ones that don't make it to the news, right? So everybody pay like a lot of companies are paying for cyber insurance right now.
Hmm.
You know what one of the biggest things you can get a deduction for your cyber insurance is? Zerto.
Yep.
DR
Yep.
services.
Yep.
Have
Absolutely.
have that
Yep.
light switch and then so again, even if you're paying us $8 million a year, fictional number, everybody, fictional
Yep.
number, just using the graphic. Um, what are you saving on cyber
Yep.
insurance? What are you saving when the event when it happens? It's
Yep.
we used this in when we were talking with our partners at Veeam about backups, right? It's
Hmm.
no longer if, it's when.
Yep.
Something is
Yep.
going to happen at some
Yes.
point,
Yes.
right? So what
Yes.
is it worth to you?
Absolutely. Well, and I actually sat in on a really neat panel the other day that was around cybersecurity and these insurance policies. There were some insurance underwriters in there that were asking. So they're starting to. So when insurance policies first came out for any type of cyber insurance, it was an all or nothing, yes or no, checkbox. Do you want it? Yes, no. Now what they do is they give you this astronomical figure, and if you jump through hoops, they discount it.
Right.
It's kind of like back to car insurance. Did you get a safe driver? Did you, an
Yeah.
older
Did you
car
plug the
or,
little
or
thing into your
safety?
car?
Yep, exactly. So cyber insurance has done the same thing. So I recently walked through a policy with one of these providers, and they actually had on there if you could have your copy of your data in three separate locations. And I was like, huh, Zerto can do that. And they're like, exactly. And they're like, you get a check mark for each location that you put your data. And that becomes very powerful because again, you were talking, Chris, you can't do it on your own as a customer, as an end customer. Call in some help, ask Otava, ask them to put you in those two, second and third location to help you out because you're going to save money just on that policy alone, much less, just peace of mind. But, I mean, definitely sitting down with them was eye-opening. They're like, now we'll write a policy to anyone. It just
Yeah.
starts at this number and then gets discounted and discounted. And I was like, wow,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And for all of our friends with you're talking about three sites, right?
yep,
With the new Broadcom VMware fiasco that I'm sure several people in the audience are dealing with, you can't like not only can you not afford just the hardware, but now the if you have anything running on
yes,
in your DR site at all whatsoever, pay me my
yes,
money for the
yep,
whole thing, right?
yep.
How many companies can afford that? Probably very few, right? Come come talk to us at Otava. We've got these DR sites up and ready to go. Again, we are the rental car service, right? We have cars here ready to go. We already have them sitting in inventory. You don't need to go buy another one. And along the way, guess what we'll do? We'll help you do your tests, right? We'll help you design a recovery plan. Because, like, how many companies, if they sat down right this second, are like, oh yeah, this is what we do in a DR failover event, or even if you don't have DR, like a backup failover event, right?
Yeah,
What's how many companies out there have plans and
yeah,
and know them and have them
yes,
documented?
yep. My favorite example is if I got all disasters happen Friday night. We all know that. And so Friday night, if everything goes down and I get everything you need back up and running on Saturday, how does Mike print on Monday? Do you know? Are you sure that you've got everything? Right? And the only way that you know that is to test it. And if it's too scary to test and too cumbersome to test, you never did. So then Monday, even though you got yourself out of the weeds, you're back up and running. Monday's still scary. And it shouldn't be scary. You should have tested it. You should have had it documented to a T what you needed to do to get up and running, And if you can't test, you can't do that. Chris, you and I talked the other day. Tests used to happen once a year, and it was a 3-day fiasco. And I've never been part of, I mean, 26 years in the industry, I've never been part of one that was successful. I just got to tell you. And there's always something, but now you have 12 calendar months to come up with a fix for that one thing that went wrong, even though the entire environment is different in 12
Right,
months.
right.
So you're like, well, let's see how bad of a failure it is this
Yeah.
time. And
What are we gonna
that's
have
what
to
it is.
fix next year?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
you
just,
know,
it's insane.
Yeah, and when you and I were talking the other day, you brought up the MGM event, right? We
Mm-hmm.
can't run our elevators. Who
Yes.
in their right mind was like, oh yeah, we need to have DR failover
Yeah.
for elevator control. You
Yep.
mean those don't just run manually on
No.
the buttons that you push, right? Like,
Nope.
and if you're an
Yeah.
admin, like these aren't things you ever think. Like,
No.
until you talk to the people who own that specific slice of the business, you have no
Yes.
idea.
None.
Hey,
None.
Chris.
And
Yeah,
oops,
yeah,
Oh,
Irma.
sorry, just saw a question in the
no.
chat that felt you could probably answer right now. How often do you recommend teams to do a failover test?
So for me, we require our customers to do it every 6 months. From a recommendation standpoint, at least quarterly, right? Because
Hmm.
like we just talked about, the amount of changes that happen to
Yeah.
the average business in just a single quarter is enough to justify, hey, does everything work in our current failover plan, right? So that's me, Chris. I don't know if you like
Yeah.
your thoughts on
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. So, and I like to look at tests in a bunch of different ways, right? So you've got, kind of your standard run-of-the-mill test, maybe the full environment, right? And so, like you said, maybe that's quarterly, maybe that's every
Hmm.
6 months. But what about, so I worked with a company that had this really, neat mindset. They failed over their entire help desk once a quarter. They said, you're the ones answering the calls anyways, and they're like, let's see how bumpy it gets. And that's really what it was. And so they would fail it over and just see. And they're like, so do you get more calls? Is it about the same? What do we need to fix? How do we iron this out? Because in the event of a disaster, you're frontline. And we need to know that frontline is up and working. And so I think that the testing environment really, I mean, it comes back down to what your company is, what it does, who you have behind you. I've worked with so many different companies that have huge IT backing. And then I've also worked with some that have one or two guys. And so what does that look like? And what does it make you feel better to do? Like I love Otava's stance, like let's get it in once a quarter. If
Hmm.
I'm not going to hurt your production, I'm not going to take
Right.
down data. I'm not going to, corrupt anything. No harm, no foul if it doesn't work out. Let's do it once a quarter. Let's prove it and then sleep better at night.
Yeah, one of my favorite customers. So when I used to work on, so I used to work Sundays on day shift, right? And I actually worked second shift after or before that too, but worked Sundays for a long time. And we had a customer that would do a hard failover. They would shut down production once a quarter on Sunday for 4 hours, and we would sit on the phone with them, do their full hard failover at once a quarter on Sunday. I love that. Like to me, that is like that is making sure that you are ready for anything, right? Because it's and even with our isolated testing, we can do 90 to 95% of yep, everything's going to be good. But what about that public networking? You never like it's you can say, hey, the firewall configs are exactly the same, but until you try them, you just don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's I quarterly. Please quarterly. And again, Otava, we will do assisted tests with you 2 times a year, right? You open a support ticket, say, hey guys, I want to do a support or
Hmm.
I want to do a DR failover test on X day and time. And we say, okay, let's find a resource to help you, sit
Hmm.
through that. And, if it's,
Yeah.
depending on what kind of test you want to do, we'll get a network resource involved. We'll get a systems resource involved and make sure that everything is doing, what we expect Zerto to do,
Yeah.
right? And that's, re-IPing to the isolated network so you're not using those production IPs if there is a live firewall in front
Hmm.
of it, right? So let's say you want to keep your DR firewall public live all the time. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. It's not my preferred method, but okay, do what works
Yeah.
for you, right? That's why we have that second isolated network so we can do tests without impacting it.
Hmm.
So, follow-up question to that. So, then is the planning or the actual testing more important?
Yes. Yeah, yes is my answer because both are 1A 1B, right? If
Hmm.
if you don't if you don't take the time to sit down and look at your environment and develop that plan, doing a test is useless. But
Yeah.
having a plan without testing it is not necessarily useless, but pretty darn close.
Yeah, I like to lean back on. So Microsoft has the best practice, specifically around Active Directory and domain controllers. And so they like to have, your Active Directory domain controllers at your production site, always at least pairs, if not a whole gaggle of them. And then you've got your DR site, and they want a live one over there, and they want you to do Active Directory replication between the two. Get that. Totally get that. Yep, that could stand, right? Here's where I like to step in with Zerto. I like to protect one of those Active Directory servers that you have in that gaggle on the production side. And then when we run those isolated tests, I like to fail over that one in there and see what it does. And then every now and then, I like to grab that running Active Directory server that you had on the DR site and throw that in the mix too. And just see, like when you take two Active Directory servers from different locations, different roles, different responsibilities. What happens? And again, it's in an isolated environment. No harm, no foul. If the test goes sideways, you hit stop. Nothing goes back to production. Nothing goes back to Active Directory, and you're testing it. So again, your plan was always to use that live AD server. But if it got corrupted, if something happened, if you lost users, where do you go now? And you have to have a plan for that. You have to have it where if then else, right? You've built out your decision tree, you know how to get back up and running. And that's how you do it is you make a plan and then you test it. And then maybe you edit that plan.
Right. Yeah. And for our friends in chat that have worked with Active Directory, you know how big of a pain in the neck replicating that is. And, I've had, multiple hour conversations as a service provider, as a CSP, right? Who's trying to design these DR environments with Active Directory in mind because, let's say I want to do a live test. Well, now I'm testing with Active Directory data being written at live data being written to that DR AD controller while
Yeah.
prod is shut down. What happens when that happens? What happens if I shut off the network between prod and DR? And
Hmm.
now one gets tombstoned. Then what? How long does
Yeah.
it take for it to get tombstoned?
Hmm.
Active Directory to me that's a great example because it is one of the finickiest
Yeah.
applications that you can play with and use as a test point.
Hmm. But it better be isolated because if
Yeah,
you are tested on that bad dog in the live environment, I mean, ooh,
you're gonna
it's
have a
it's
bad
terrible.
time.
Yeah.
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 Do we have any other questions, Irma? I think we're at the end of our primary talk points.
Not at the moment. We could give it a couple of seconds here and see if anyone else has anything to add.
Man,
Here
we're
we
gonna get
go.
that.
Other tools are important to a disaster recovery failover strategy?
What other tools? Oh man, there's well, I mean, we talked about one of them, right? Making sure that your networking is failover ready, right? If you have just an empty firewall sitting over on that other side, or God forbid, there's a switch that doesn't have a cable plugged in, or anything like that. These are the things where you're talking about when we're talking about cloud environments, right? When you're like, oh, well, I'll just fail everything over to the other VLAN. Will you though? Right? There's still physical components and virtual networking that has to be involved. So like making sure that you're including that in your DR runbook, in your business continuity plan, understanding those failure points, super important to me.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, nobody can see, but I'm wearing my Zerto shirt, so this is, not staying in my lane. But I mean, you need to have a backup plan as well. Like we don't do backups at Zerto, but my good friends do at all the other products. You need to have a backup plan. You need to know that your data is also secure. Compliance issues all the time, right? HIPAA compliance. I actually worked for a telco provider forever ago. We'd run our backups. It was all done down to tape. The second that you take a tape and then you put it back in the machine, it's going to break. Some woman had figured out this secret to, basically it was when the no call lists first came out. And she would call in and say, "You guys called me and I'm on the no call list." And it was something that she
Mm.
could sue for. And they would put the tape back in from 4 years ago and it would bust and she would cash her check. And she had an amazing hustle going. And it was like her income. But again, you need the backup strategy, right? And now that we don't rely as heavily, I do see tapes every now and then. We don't rely as heavily on backup tapes. You still need them as part of your DR plan. You still need to get, your data needs to be safe for the last 7 years or whatever, depending on your compliance issues. But yeah, I would say networking, backups, DR, obviously Zerto can get you up and running. But some of
Hmm.
the other things, Active Directory is big. Exchange, do you
Yeah.
run your Exchange servers or do you do O365? What does that look like? With your
Right.
backups, do you have external endpoints that it hits, or is it all internal handled by Otava? And you need to know
Right.
that going in. If you fail over because you do all of your backups and everything local, and you fail into your DR site, do you have all of that? Like you need to look at that. And that's where pulling in, a CSP and an MSP like Otava and saying, "Hey, you guys just have like a ton of knowledge because you've worked on this. What am I missing?"
Yeah.
Preach.
And that's that conversation that really helps with dealing with people that do it all the time.
Yeah, and to similar to backups, right? If you don't have a reliable antivirus system, if you do a
Hmm.
failover after a malware event, then what? Right?
Hmm.
Yeah, okay, so you failed over to before it hit. How do you know you're clean
Yeah.
until because again, when we're doing these isolated tests, I can go into the machine isolated, run that full scan, do what I need to do,
Yep.
but if you don't have that reliable system or a system that has to be connected to the internet, right, to do anything, well, that's not useful in an event like that.
Yeah.
While we're waiting for some questions to come in,
Hmm.
what is one key takeaway from each of you that you guys would want our audience to take away? And
Have a
Chris, you can
continuity
go
plan.
first.
Have a continuity plan by far and away. Sit down with if even if you don't come to us Otava or if you're using another MSP or you're just doing this all in house, have the people like the silo owners or the business unit owners all sit down in a room and determine what has to stay up.
Yeah.
What pieces of the puzzle fit together and impact the other pieces? Because if we lose one cog or we lose one piece, then the whole machine is down, right? So make sure that you understand the full width and breadth of every piece of your infrastructure.
Yeah. And I would say because it's not, we can start looking at it, it's not if, it's when, right? Do the planning, right? Just start getting the consultation. Decide at that point, right? Don't just sit back and be like, there's just no way. Like we're not important enough, we're not big enough, our data's not, we can make it the week. Whatever your question is right now, just reach out and just look at it. See not only what does it cost to get DR and backup and stuff like that that is serviced through an MSP like Otava, but also what else can you guys offer me? Like, oh, that's crazy. I've never even heard of that. And there's a lot of, like, if you look out there in my industry, it's everywhere. Everything is as a service, right? United Airlines the other day announced a new subscription plan based on flying, right? Because you use it when you need to, but you pay it this amount a month and then you get discounts. So come to a place like Otava and say, what are your as a service offerings? What can you help me and take the lift off of my IT staff that maybe don't specialize in this?
Yeah,
This was not why I hired them. This is what they deal with. What else do you guys offer? How can you ease my mind? How can you help me out?
yeah.
Great advice. So I do see a question in the chat here. It says, what are the technical requirements for implementing the VZD tenant plugin ZZZ?
The ZCC.
ZCC,
Uh,
yes.
so I'm gonna. I have not played around
Hmm.
personally with the ZCC a ton. I know that we have the VCDA plugin in
Hmm.
most of our VCDA nodes
Hmm.
because again, if we have I don't think we talked about this a whole lot. We have self-service is a big part of DR, right? You don't want to have to get on the phone and wait for support to get back to you if you're in the middle of a DR event, right? So we have the VCDA plugin. We also have API calls from our Encore portal. But how they are technically configured, I'm going to leave that to Crystal because she's smarter than I am.
So this is, I always tell people, so I talk to a lot of people not in the industry, family, friends, whatnot. So I always take a step back and just kind of clear the air as to where we are, right? So VCD is, vCloud Director. So when you look at like a VMware world, you've got like these vCenters, right, that enable you to run anything in a hypervisor. So it's virtualized machines. It's the think tank. And then VMware came out with something that said, hey, what if we all had to share an environment though? So then they created VCD, which is a cloud director that said it's exactly that, right? So it's a cloud director that sits on top and pulls all its little vCenters in so you can share vCenters rather than just Chris's vCenter, Irma's vCenter, and these are shared environments. So what Zerto did is Zerto said, hey, we'll totally run on your vCenter. I'll also run on your Hyper-V, SCVMM. I'll run in your public cloud. Like, what do you need? But if you want to put that cloud director on the top of it, we're going to pull in the functionality that it takes with a ZCC, which is a Zerto Cloud Connector, for you to come in as an outside customer, hit that cloud connector, and be routed to that cloud director, utilizing the shared vCenter. So really what it did was it gave you, if you think about it, a chunk of that cloud that is now you as a customer's, So it helped with, security presence. It helped with, keeping the resources, aligned. Maybe you need high performance disks, maybe not. And those resources are all, basically configured with that vCloud director and Zerto pulling into, they call them VORGs, virtual organizations, and we call them ZORGs, Zerto organizations, and they match up. So basically, yes, the technical side of it is you're going to need some stuff running to make sure that it works. Otava's got you covered, and it's going to be a
Right.
really nice landing spot to be segregated in a
Yeah,
shared
so
environment.
let me ask you. So the ZCC
Hmm.
is a service that runs through the ZCM, correct?
Yep, the
Yeah.
cloud
So
manager. Yep.
so for everyone out there, so there are two big pieces of the Zerto, or I should say three, because I don't want to discount the VRAs themselves.
Yeah.
So there's three big pieces to Zerto deployment for someone like a cloud service provider like us. So there's the ZVM, the Zerto Virtual Manager. That's the big hub. That's the screenshot I showed in we showed in the earlier slide. That's the I own all of these sites. I have direct access to all of these sites. This is where I go to manage all of them, right? And there's one ZVM per site, so one
Hmm.
virtual manager per site. Great. Well, what if I want off-premise customers, right? Or if I've got, VCD instances with these
Hmm.
virtualized, it's not just vCenter anymore. It's virtual data centers inside of a
Yeah.
data center, right? We're going to start nesting dolls our virtual infrastructure even more now, right? So now we deploy another appliance called the ZCM, the Zerto Cloud Manager, to help us connect all of those strings to our different virtual infrastructures,
Hmm.
right? So that's where the ZCC, Zerto Cloud Connector, connects to that cloud manager, again,
Hmm.
per site, right? So now we've got all of these strings that we can tie together and bundle them up in a little bow,
Yeah.
and then again present it to you in your VC in your nested virtual infrastructure, so you
Yeah.
can see just your little strip of DR.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
I hope that helped. That was a real deep in the weedsy
Yeah.
question.
No, I think it did. Definitely. I didn't see a follow-up question come through. Um, we have 5 minutes, so I'll give it 20 seconds for any last minute questions to come in. If not, we can wrap this up. Uh, last call. Thank you for your time and your participation. We look forward to seeing you at our future webinars. We're here to help and support your journey towards a robust disaster recovery strategy, so don't hesitate to reach out and connect with us. As you can see on the slide up, we have our website, our email, our phone number. So that's it. This concludes our webinar. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.